What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be going over how to use the hair particle system to take your fabric texture to the next level. As you can see right here, we have the hair. It just brings it all together. And if we just shut this off, you'll see how flat this looks. Even though that the texture looks good, we got some depth, we got some bump, everything is looking good. But once we add the hair particles to this, it takes it to a whole nother level. So by the end of this video, you'll have an in-depth understanding of how to set up the hair particle systems, which values do you need to control to get a certain type of look, and also how to swap out the materials. So without further ado, let's hop into the video. So before we jump in the particle tab, let's go ahead and make sure that a couple of things are set up that affects our hair system. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is our subdivision. So whether you have the subdivision before and after plays a big role in how our hair particle system will be distributed on our mesh. For example, if I have the particle system all at the top, you can see how it changes. And also if I have the particle system all the way at the bottom, you can see that the hairs are still there, but it affects our displacement map. So we want to make sure that when we add our particle systems, that we put it in between the first subdivision and also the second subdivision. So to correct the hairs, we're going to go ahead to the particle tab. We're going to remove this. So we're going to go ahead and hit this plus icon. So when we hit this plus icon, you can see that our texture changed. And remember what I just said, where you have your particle system placed affects the material and everything. So we're going to go ahead and take this and move it in between our two subdivisions. And you can see that our base material is back to the original. Now, before we move forward, we're gonna go ahead and work in a solid view. Now, don't worry, because we added a particle system, you can see all these spheres projected onto our monkey. That's okay, don't worry. What we need to do is actually, instead of the emitter, hit the hair. Now you can see that the spheres are gone and we have something that looks like hair. Now let's go over a couple settings that will be important to getting the look that we're going for. So if we look at the emission, so that's the first layer. We could think about it as the base foundation to our hair. So we have the number. If I go to 1, you can see how I just have one strand of hair. All right, we're gonna put this back to 1,000. All right, and our seed is just the randomization of the placement of the hair. And then we have hair length, there we go. So we can have something that looks very stubby. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and put our hair length to something very, very small right here. And our segment, you won't really see how it's affecting it until we mess with a couple of the other settings. So with our emission down, what we're also going to look at is our hair shape. So now in a solid view, you can touch the diameter, root, and tip, and you won't see anything happening. So what we need to do is go ahead and go to our render preview. So now you can see we have shapes. So basically what the hair particle system is objects projected onto our mesh. Now we're gonna go ahead and focus on the diameter root and diameter tip. So basically think of the root as the base of the shape and the tip as the very top of the shape. So you can see once we move the diameter root, you can see how our base shape is getting larger. And if we look at the tip, we'll make them the same value, 3.2. You can see how the top is being affected too. Now, you see how we have a point. So the reason why we have a point and this is not identical, even though we have the same root and tip, is because we have this option close tip. So once we uncheck this, you'll see how both the bottom and also the top is the same, creating this rectangle shape. Now, if we play with the strand shape, you'll see that nothing is happening, right? Because we actually need to have different values. There you go. So basically with the strand shape, you have more customization on how you want your strands to look. But we're gonna go ahead and keep this at 0. And for our diameter, root, and tip, we'll leave it at 2 for now. But we will be adjusting it now. And if you scroll out, you can see how each hair looks. I don't know if you know this, but there's a secret button in Blender that if you click, you get more options, and that button is the advanced. So once we click the advanced, you can see that we have multiple things pop up. So if I uncheck this, you can see that it adds more settings. And the settings that we want to focus on is the physics. Now, each part of the physics will do something to our hair strand. So underneath the forces tab, we're gonna mess with the first value. And once we just slightly turn this up, you'll see that our hair becomes longer and also starts to curve. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. We won't need to mess with the drag since we're not animating this. And once we add some damp to this, slightly. You can see how it shortens it and makes it even more curly. Now, if you go too crazy, this is what you get. So you want to make sure not to crank up the damp all the way up. So we're just going to bring this down. There we go. So now that we've gone over all the values that we need to touch in order to bring in our hair particle system, let's go ahead and fine tune the values to get it exactly how we want it. Before we move on to adjusting more options, I actually want to show you the mass value. So once we increase the mass, you can also see how it's affecting the strands and their lengths, and also adding some variation to our other values. So we're gonna go ahead and keep that at 1. So the first thing that we're gonna wanna adjust is our first value. All right, we're gonna go ahead and type it to 0.061. And then for our dampening, we're gonna do 0.025. All right, perfect. And then for our mass, we're gonna do 0.206. There we go. So you should be getting something that looks like this. So once our physics is dialed in, let's go ahead and mess with our hair shapes. So our diameter root, we're gonna do something very tiny, 1, 2, 3. For our tip, we're gonna do another small value, 0.73. So now you can see how it's starting to look like fuzz and hair strands on our fabric texture. So right now you can't see anything because we only have 1,000 hair particles. So let's go ahead and add just a little bit more in the emission tab. So we're gonna go ahead and add 100,000, and now you can see how our hair strands are popping up. So these hair strands are just too long for my taste. So one thing that we have to keep in mind that there's multiple places that affect the length of our hair. So we have hair length here. Also under physics, if we mess with the browning and we also mess with the dampening, you can see how that's also affecting our length. Now, if you're going for this look, this is a pretty cool look, but you know, we want to get something that's more on the realistic side. So we're just going to bring these values back down, but we're not going to touch the forces and the physics. We're actually going to bring the hair length down here. So something like 0.01 works. We have everything dialed in. Let's go ahead and mess with the materials. So right now, what's driving our materials of the particle system is actually the underneath texture. But let's say you want to change the color to maybe white or black, or maybe something more out there like orange. How do you go about doing that? If we go down in our particles tab and we click a render, see we have some options to change our material. Right now, if you click it, you might be wondering, okay, how do I change the material? So the first thing that we have to do, we actually have to go to our material tab and add another material. So we're gonna disconnect the principled and we're gonna add a hair. And we're gonna go back to our particle systems. We're gonna go back to our render tab. And now once you click material, you can see we added another material. I'm gonna go ahead and click hair. So now you can see we have this dark brown color. So our roughness, we're just gonna bring this up because we don't want it too rough. And then for our color, gonna bring it to white. Right down to saturation. So if you want more fuzz and you want it to be very distinct, white is a great color. But instead of white, I'm gonna go ahead and do a darker green. Take out some of the saturation. We can do black, or let's say we wanna do something just a little bit out there, maybe like a yellow. So we bring the coloring up, you can see we're getting another effect. Now you don't have to use the principled hair, you can also just use a regular principled. Just adjust it however you want. But for the sake of this tutorial, I really like how the base material is really driving the hair material. So we're just gonna change that back to material. There we go. And now you can see we have all those whites, darks, middle values that gives our texture that realism. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned a lot. Leave in the comment section if you learned something, and also what other ideas and videos would you guys like to see. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the post notification as we'll be dropping more. So that's all for today. Have a blessed day.